A short story. Contains dark themes. Auschwitz. The year was 1944. Mattia was her name. She was 11 years old, and her mum, Esther, had said to her once that her name meant God's gift. Since giving birth to her beautiful child, she was God's gift to her. Since the start of World War II, life has been difficult, but they looked out for each other the best they could. One day when there was rain for hours, the mother and daughter proceeded down the crowded street, where many of their kind lived. It was like a little community. Without warning, 3 army lorries appeared ahead, and a dozen soldiers got out of the vehicles, approaching people nearby. Esther didn't trust them and took Mattia's hand, crossing the road to avoid them. "What's wrong, mother?" the girl asked, looking up at her. Esther turned to her with a grave look. Please hurry." "But mother, why are you scared of them?" Mattia asked again. Esther stopped. She bent down to her child. "I love you so much, Mattia. All I want to do is keep you safe. The thing is, I find it hard to trust anyone these days with all you hear from others. You can understand that, can't you?" "Yes, mother," was all she answered. Both carried on with their journey home. That evening there was a knock at the door. Mattia sat at the small table in one of the small rooms. Esther was cooking the food she'd bought earlier. Money was scarce, she did the best she could. The moment she heard someone at the door, she was reluctant to answer. Where they lived, there were a lot of desperate, hungry people about. Most were kind, but even still, it was better to be safe than sorry. Especially with Mattia there. Esther walked to the entrance. Opening it, she saw a man dressed in a soldier's uniform. When he spoke, it was a German accent. He said, "A lot of your neighbors are coming with us tomorrow morning for a better life. You can't live here, it's disgusting and dirty. We have built a fine place for people like you, where you can resettle somewhere safe. If you have family, they can come as well. I'm afraid you don't have a choice in the matter. It's too dangerous around here for you, with the war raging even more so. Be ready by 7 a.m. We'll meet you outside on the street." Before she could answer, the man had gone. For the rest of that evening, they ate some food and packed the little belongings they had. Esther explained to her daughter about going to a new home where it was safe. Deep down, she didn't know what to think. At 7 a.m., both stood on the street where others waited with their belongings. 7 lorries turned up and parked in front of them. Everyone got on. Some of the soldiers seemed aggressive while they did this. One elderly man fell over, hitting his head on the concrete. The soldiers laughed and told him to get up. Mattia saw this and felt sorry for him. On the back of the truck, she sat with mother. They held hands. The truck stopped after an hour. Everyone got out. The soldiers signaled them to board the train. Once Mattia was inside with mother, she noticed there was nowhere to sit, apart from the damp floor. It was dark in there and smelt badly. There wasn't much room either. Esther turned to Mattia. "Be brave, my little girl. We'll soon be there. I promise you it'll be better for the both of us." "I know it will, mother," she replied. After a while, once everyone was on the train, they began the journey to their new home. A few hours later, the train stopped. No one had had a drink all day, and it was too crowded in there. Elderly people suffered the worst. Some lay on the floor of the carriage in between others' feet. Many stood at the windows trying to catch the rain from outside for a drink, mainly with no luck. Mattia sat with her mother at the end of the carriage, not knowing what the coming days would bring. The man had promised them a better life, and Esther prayed it would be. A mean-looking soldier walked through the carriage, ordering everyone to get off. Esther stood up holding Mattia's hand. The man stared at Esther and gave her a wry smile, saying, "Time to get off, time to get off. You'll have a good time here. Now hurry up, hurry up." He pushed them off the train where both now stood with hundreds of people of all different ages and genders. 2 soldiers a short distance away kicked a man in his 30s on the ground as he tried to fight back. One got his gun out and shot him in the head. His body now lay still in the mud. Blood ran from the wound. People close by screamed. One of the soldiers told them to shut up or they'll be next. The man's body was thrown onto a wheelbarrow and pushed away. Everyone stayed quiet. Esther whispered into Mattia's left ear, "Be brave, my Mattia. You are God's gift. If anyone can survive this, you will. I love you, my little girl, always remember that. Whatever happens to me, remember I love you." Esther kissed her daughter's cheek softly. The soldier from the carriage pushed them to the walking crowd, where they observed many buildings. From one in the far distance, dark smoke billowed from it. They proceeded to the front gate. At the top, it read, "Albeit marked frei." Translated in English, "Work makes one free." A man approached them. "How old are you, little girl?" Before Mattia could answer, her mother said, "She's 13. A good worker." The man looked at Esther aggressively. "I was asking the child, not you. Wait here." The man walked to 3 soldiers and said something to them. One came over, grabbing Mattia and dragging her away from Esther. Esther tried to run to her, shouting, "Where are you taking my daughter?" A soldier close to her used the end of his gun to hit her in the face. Mattia watched her mother as she fell. The last thing Mattia saw of her beloved mother was a group of soldiers kicking her violently while still on the ground. A soldier carried Mattia away from it. "Mummy, mummy," she screamed. From the crowd, a man in his 60s shouted to her, "If you want to live, be quiet now." A soldier grabbed the man, telling him to shut up. The person did what he was told. Mattia now stood in a long queue of people going to another part of the camp. On the right of her was a second queue consisting of young children and older adults. Where were they being taken? She heard 7 gunshots from somewhere as they echoed hauntingly around. After a few minutes, Mattia was pushed into a building with 20 other people, their ages ranging from 13 to 50. A soldier ordered them to strip. Reluctantly they did what they were told. A man wearing spectacles checked them one by one, telling the soldiers to take certain individuals away. Mattia never saw them again. After 2 hours, they were ordered to change into different clothes. They were taken to different parts of the camp, ready for work early the next day. With horror, Mattia heard faint screams coming from the building where black smoke escaped from the top. Also, rotting corpses were observed everywhere while the flies crawled on what was left of them. She was in hell. She was sad and missed her mother terribly. One of the last things Mattia's mother had said to her was, "Be brave, Mattia. You are God's gift. If anyone can survive this, you will." "I love you, mother. And I will never forget you," Mattia said quietly to herself. A few moments later, a soldier pointed to a building. "You live there. A man will see you inside." She entered. When it was still dark, a loud noise woke her up. She had a bed and a little area for her clothes and other things that the man had given her. There were many women and girls just like her in the building. She got dressed, as did everybody else. Mattia copied the other women. They washed, went to the toilet, and drank tea or coffee. There was another loud gong, which meant heading outside into the roll court square, where everyone was accounted for. Then one by one they were given jobs picked by the man in charge. Mattia was given kitchen duties, where she headed immediately. In the kitchen it was hard work. Being a girl of 11 was tough enough in the situation she faced. Not seeing her mother and not knowing what had happened to her didn't help matters. But she needed to be strong for her parent. By midday, they all headed back to their quarters for a 1-hour break and food. By 1 p.m., she was back to work until 6:45 p.m. By 7 another roll call took place, accounting for all the prisoners. After that, they were all served bread with accompaniments. By the 3rd gong that day, it meant heading back to your quarters to wash and go to the toilet. By 9 p.m. it was time to head to bed for the nighttime silence. Mattia lay in bed and cried quietly. The next morning the first alarm had woken her up, and like yesterday, she did the same routine. The second one meant going outside and standing in a line. While the soldier in charge counted the many women prisoners, another soldier noticed one of the women was late on parade as she ran to the line, clearly petrified. He walked straight to her. The lady, who was no older than 20, stared at the ground, trembling. The man shouted, "You are late. Everyone here is going to learn from your disobedience. This will start with you taking your clothes off now." "Please don't, I beg you. I didn't mean to be late. It was an accident," she begged, still looking at the ground. The man turned to the line of women, then said, "If you're late, this is what happens, understand? So, yet again, remove your clothes. Now." The lady removed her clothes, and 2 soldiers beside the man laughed. She looked so pale and undernourished. "Now kneel on the ground and beg for forgiveness," he said, enjoying this immensely. She kneeled in the mud. "Please don't hurt me," she cried. Mattia shuddered as the man punched her several times until she was still. The man shouted at the soldiers to take her to the medical unit. They carried her away. Still in shock, all the women went to their jobs, trying to forget what they'd just witnessed. The next few days Mattia was growing more confident in how to survive this hellish place. Keep your head down, stick to the rules, and work hard. She'd even made a friend where she stayed. The girl was 3 years older than her and slept 2 beds away. They'd usually talk after the 3rd alarm until bedtime. Her name was Alma. She arrived here 4 months ago with her parents and younger brother. She hadn't seen them since. Mattia asked her what the smoke was about from some of the buildings at the back of the camp. Alma said she'd seen a lot of people being taken there, usually people who had just gotten off the train, but for some reason, the poor souls wouldn't come out again. Most of them are children or older people. Maybe that's where her mother ended up. Mattia thought, still sad. The thing was, showing your emotions or any kind of weakness in a place like this would get you killed. She needed to be strong for her parent. On Sunday everyone had a day off. The hunger that Mattia had felt in the first week wasn't so bad now. She looked a lot thinner, though. Some of the prisoners she saw daily were skin and bone. But the one thing she'd never get used to was the piles of bodies all over the place before they were taken away by other prisoners of the camp, while the officers and soldiers looked on. That evening there was a concert to which the women were invited. The officers and soldiers would be there as well. Mattia and Alma sat together. A young soldier asked Alma if she would like to go for a walk. There was a lot of alcohol being drunk, the main culprits being the people in charge. Mattia was reluctant for her friend to go, but Alma said that everything would be okay. For the rest of the evening, Mattia watched the music with Alma not far from her mind. Back at her quarters, Mattia was getting ready for bed while noticing her friend's bed was empty. She was getting worried about her. The next morning she still wasn't there. She never saw Alma again. The next week she missed her friend terribly. What had happened to her? She was the first person she'd properly gotten close to in here. One morning while walking to work, she saw the bastard from that night. Mattia looked at him briefly, and he noticed. In the kitchen the same day, the man in charge of the place came in and said, "There's an officer who wants to see you outside. You better go." "Okay, sir," she answered. Outside was that bastard she hated so much for taking Alma away from her. He seemed nervous. Finally, he said, "If you say anything about last Sunday, I will cut your throat." Got it? She thought back to her mother and how they had treated her, then her friend. Without thinking, she spat in his face. When the man in charge of the kitchen found her a few minutes later, she had been beaten badly. Straight away she was taken to the doctor. Her boss vouched for her to the officer in charge, saying she was one of the best workers he had. 4 days later, Mattia was back at work, still a little bruised. She didn't understand what had happened that day. Maybe the anger that she felt had become too much. The man who attacked her was never seen again. There were rumors he'd been shot at the back of the camp in one of the fields. From that day forward, she never got too close to anyone again. Another month passed, and Mattia kept her head down and worked very hard. Always on time for roll call. But the stench of death was everywhere, with the piles of decaying corpses to the new arrivals either becoming prisoners or being led to the buildings, never to be seen again. It was terrible to witness daily. Some of the women and girls from where she lived would vanish, and then new ones would take their place. Maybe they'd been taken somewhere else, Or maybe they'd angered the men in charge and were killed. Another month turned to another month, and somehow she was still there. Every Sunday, being the day off, she'd rest, eat what food was given to her, and try to relax, even though being trapped in this nightmare would be very difficult at times. Mother was always on her mind. By Christmas of 1944, there was a change in the camp. It was hard to explain, but the officers and soldiers seemed more agitated than normal, frequently taking it out on other prisoners. Many would be beaten terribly or taken to the death fields to be shot. New arrivals were becoming fewer. And by the 7th of January, there were rumors that men were coming to save them. Mattia didn't want to get her hopes up and carried on as normal because the rumors were based on nothing apart from what other prisoners had observed from the change in the camp. Some of the Nazis had left, and only a few remained. The trains outside the camp became less. But the killing of vulnerable, innocent prisoners carried on. More fires were observed all around the camp as they tried to burn the many corpses. Then one day everything changed. Mattia wasn't sure what the date was, as being in the camp for so long, everything blurred into one. It was like every day was another day to survive. Another day closer to freedom. From the kitchen there was a commotion outside. Fearing the worst, thinking more poor souls were being slaughtered, she rushed out of the building. The man in charge, who was of Jewish descent as well, followed her. And then that's when they saw it. Both ran to the barbed wire fences, joining thousands of others. No one knew what was going on. From the entrance of the camp were many army trucks, and on either side of them were marching soldiers dressed in different uniforms from the ones they'd gotten used to. The front vehicle had a loudspeaker, and in different languages, a man repeated the same thing. We come, stay where you are. Help is underway. We are the British soldiers. Help is underway. Mattia turned to the man from the kitchen. They cuddled out of sheer joy and cried for all the people they'd lost. The freedom they'd wanted for so long was finally here. Help had finally come. On the 27th of January, Auschwitz was liberated. The end.